Today we're going to be discussing Kyle Rittenhouse, the kid with the rifle. What we know now that we did not know before. All of this and a whole lot more on today's Charlie Crimebuster. What some people have called, well, the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, good day, and welcome to the Charlie Show today. Hey, we're going to discuss Kyle Rittenhouse, the kid with a rifle. I say kid with a rifle because this is the way he was mostly described in the media. You know, I think that of all the high-profile trials that we discussed this past year, well, I believe this was probably the most important one. And it's important for a freedom that you and I have today. I want to tell you why in just a moment. But first, let me welcome you each to the podcast. Thank you so much for the kind comments that many of you have made about Charlie Crimebuster and our podcast. Those comments are appreciated. We do have listeners from the East Coast to the West Coast, and we appreciate each and every one of you. And every week, we grow more listeners. Thank you. Now, I hope by now that you've subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform. We are on most of them. If you do not know how to subscribe, well, just send me a email at Gmail, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We'll send you instructions on how you can do that. Now, also, to get some housekeeping out of the way, you see, housekeeping, that's what we podcasters call getting information your way that is not in the focus story. I do want to remind you to stay alert for our coming New Year project. We're going to be launching the Peacemaker Network. This is going to be a network that is set up to support men and women who are our true heroes. The cops, other first responders, the military. We're excited about this project. You see, in this day and time, particularly, our cops are under siege. There is a war on cops, and it is costing lives. Last year, ambushes on cops, well, it increased over 100%. Our men and women are also being assaulted by a culture war out there. You see, 98% of cops, well, they are honest, good, brave men and women. Of course, there are always bad apples in the mix of any orchard, but fewer here than any other place I know. And you and I, we just must support the brave men and women who protect us. So I'm looking ahead to being a part of the Peacemaker Network, and I hope you will join us. It's going to come to us soon. The launch date, well, just weeks away in this brand new year. Now, our main focus today is Kyle Rittenhouse, the kid with the rifle. And to get started, let me give you some background on how it all started and how it ended up with this kid with a rifle on trial for his life. Now to the background and the events that led us to the night of this young man using his weapon. You see, it all started when a cop, Officer Rustin Shesky, he shot a man by the name of Jacob Blake just a few days before this happened. You see, Shesky and other officers, well, they encountered Blake after they had responded to a 911 call from a woman who reported that her boyfriend wasn't supposed to be at her home. When they arrived at the scene, the woman told them that Blake was trying to get her kids and her SUV. Well, Blake, he fought these officers as they tried to take him into custody. Shesky and another officer tried to shock him with their stun guns, but to no avail. Blake tried to get into the SUV with his young children in the back seat. This prompted Shesky to grab his shirt. Shesky told investigators that he was afraid that Blake would drive off with the children or maybe perhaps use them as hostages. Now, Gravely said that the video shows Blake turning toward Shesky with a knife and made a motion toward the officer again with the knife, which prompted Shesky to fire. Now, something else you need to know. You see, Officer Shesky, he's white. Jacob Blake, he's an Afro-American. And the shooting left Blake paralyzed. So as the press sometimes, too often, rushes to judgment And they did. They just reported that another white cop shot a black man in the back. And you can guess what happened next, right? You see, this shooting came just 3 months after George Floyd had died while a white Minneapolis police officer restrained him. And following this, protests, they erupted in that little town of Knosha, Wisconsin. Black Lives Matter supporters, they flooded downtown Knosha for several days and nights. Now, the daytime protests, they were mostly peaceful, but the night protests, they turned violent, with both rioting and looting. Fires were set near the courthouse, yes, the very one where that trial was being held about Kyle Rittenhouse. A car dealership was set afire. Over 100 cars caught fire. Buildings and businesses were damaged, many of them heavily damaged. And the governor, Tony Evers, eventually he was forced to call in the National Guard. It was that bad there in Knosha on that night that Kyle, a kid with a rifle, showed up. A U.S. Today article, it gives us some insight into how Kyle Rittenhouse and Dominic Black, his friend, came to be in Knosha during the unrest. This article covers Dominic's testimony from the Kyle's trial there in Wisconsin. Here is how the article reads. Dominic Black got to know Kyle Rittenhouse last year while dating his sister. In just a few months, this is what Black told a jury, he considered Rittenhouse a brother, and he saw him nearly every day. Now, Black testified that shortly after he got an AR-15 style rifle, Rittenhouse expressed interest in getting one himself. And during a trip to Black's family's hunting property in May 2020, Black agreed to buy a rifle for Rittenhouse, who was 17, could not lawfully buy such a one. Black said, according to the article, that he used Rittenhouse money to make that purchase. Black went on to say they discussed knowing that the purchase was illegal, but agreed that Rittenhouse would not get the gun in possession for himself until he turned 18. They shot a couple hundred rounds that week, that's what Black testified, and that was the only time Rittenhouse had used the weapon. That was until that fateful night, August the 25th, 2020. Now, Black said he and his brother Rittenhouse had gone downtown that morning, and they were witnessing the aftermath of the first 2 nights of rioting that erupted after the police shooting of Jacob Black Jr. Then they went home, but they returned around 5 p.m. This was after Black's friend, a man by the name of Nick Smith, said that they should help protect Car Source. That was an automobile dealership where Smith had formerly worked. Now, normally Black testified Rittenhouse rifle and his own were locked in gun safes at Black's house. Now, those safes could only be opened by Black's stepfather. However, his stepfather, concerned that the unrest might even reach their home, that's how bad it was that night, he had taken those guns to the basement, according to the article. Now, hold on just a second. Remember that? That really gives us a good idea on how serious this unrest was. This man was even concerned that the unrest would reach residents. Black said that he was in the kitchen. That was when Rittenhouse came up the steps with his rifle. And before returning downtown, they brought tactical slings for the rifles. Now, under questioning from prosecutor Thomas Binger, Black testified that he needed the rifle in case something had happened. He thought the weapon might deter others from damaging the business. Meanwhile, that same night, Rittenhouse, he hooked up on the ground with Ryan Bouch. He was a former military service member who was armed there as well, and he was there to protect those businesses along with others. Now, this young Kyle with a rifle, he was 17 at the time. He ended up that night shooting 3 people in self-defense. 2 of them died. The jury, and after looking at the evidence of the entire evening and that whole trial, the jury, they pronounced young Kyle not guilty. But they did so after he was already tried and convicted by a careless media. And in just a moment, we're going to go over the lies of the media. The lies of the media before, during, and after this trial. But right now, it is time for what we call our Courageous Citizen of the Week story. Now, on this, our first edition in the brand new year of Charlie Crimebuster, we're not only going to announce our Courageous Citizen of the Week, we're going to announce our Courageous Citizens of the Year. And this one won hands down. Today, my friend, COVID-19 is the leading cause of on-duty deaths in the lives of law enforcement. More than 500 police officers have died of COVID-19. But my friend, it pales in comparison with another group of brave men and women. That is, the brave men and women of healthcare. Now, we all know that some jobs are more dangerous than others. Truck drivers, loggers, construction workers, well, they're more likely to die on the job than some others. And firefighters and police officers, of course, they face more than average amount of risk while at work. And it is expected that people who take on these jobs, they already understand the risk and they follow the guidelines to stay as safe as possible. But let me ask you a question. What would you do if your job suddenly became more dangerous? And what if your workplace was unable to follow recommended guidelines to reduce that increased risk? You see, that is a situation that has faced millions of healthcare workers, those who provide medical care to patients. That includes nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, EMTs, and many others. They have a markedly higher risk of becoming infected with coronavirus, especially if they're exposed to a high volume of sick patients, such as those in emergency rooms, or those who have to go and help those who are sick. Keep in mind as well that outside of work, people who have healthcare jobs, well, they have the same pandemic-related stressors as everyone else. But on top of that, there are other worries, other challenges, including, number one, the fear and uncertainty of a heightened risk of infection, and a worry that they may carry COVID-19 coronavirus home and infect loved ones, and ever-changing recommendations from local leadership, medical and public health experts, and even political leaders who claim they know how to fight this pandemic. There is an unusually high and increasing demand for these health workers to work longer hours because their colleagues become sick and they too are quarantined. And they are constantly balancing their commitment to help others, which likely led them into their current profession in the first place, with an understandable commitment to protect themselves and their loved ones. And when ICU beds, ventilators, and staffings, well, they prove inadequate to meet demand, well, some healthcare workers, well, they have to make an enormously distressing and difficult ethical decision about which patients get life-saving care and which do not. You see, my friend, I said earlier that 500 law enforcement officers have lost their lives with COVID-19. But get this. More than 3,600 U.S. healthcare workers perished in the first year of this pandemic. This is according to Lost on the Front Line, a 12-month investigation by The Guardian and KHN to track such deaths. Lost on the Front Line, yes, it's accounted for more than 3,600 healthcare worker deaths. The first fatalities that were recorded occurred in mid-March 2020. They finished that count on April the 7th in 2021. And get this, more than half of these dedicated men and women were younger than the age of 60. You see, in the general population, the median death for COVID-19 is 78. Yet among healthcare workers, well, in that database, it was only 59. The majority of the people who died were under the age of 60. Hundreds were even younger people who also died while working on the front lines. So, my friend, our courageous citizens of 2021, it has to be, hands down, our brave men and women of healthcare. And to this, we give admiration and appreciation. These healthcare workers are indeed Charlie's Courageous Citizens of the Year. Now back to our main focus. Kyle Rittenhouse, the kid with a rifle. So he goes out to help his community, and at least 3 people try to kill him for showing up as a young man, a young 17-year-old with a rifle. And after defending himself, well, he's put on trial for his life. Now, possibly fueling this was a mass media push to paint him guilty even before the trial. A very liberal press lied to the American people about this young man. Here are some of the lies they told about Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, first, they presented him as a white supremacist. Just because he was white and trying to help out, protect local businesses at a Black Lives Matter protest that at nighttime had turned into riots and looting. Well, my friend, just because you're white and you're 17 years of age and you're trying to help protect your community, that does not make you a white supremacist. And there is no evidence, let me repeat this, there is no evidence whatsoever that he was a white supremacist, because he was not. He was a 17-year-old kid with a rifle that wanted to help out his community, which brings us to the next lie. There were those in the media who were trying to say that he was from out of the area. He was coming to Knosha just to cause trouble. Well, there were plenty of people who did that, but Kyle Rittenhouse was not one of those. You see, Kyle was living in the area just across the state lines. You see, in my home state of Tennessee, we have a town called Bristol. It's both Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia. A state line literally runs down the middle of the town. You see, often people live in areas that's adjacent to state lines. Kyle's own dad, he lived in Knosha. And Kyle himself even worked in Knosha as a lifeguard. He was there in that town almost daily. It was a part of his community. And even on the day of the shooting, while he was there, helping others wash graffiti off of a wall of a school. Now, it's ridiculous to lie and to paint him guilty in the press, and those who reported such should be ashamed of themselves. But there's even another lie. The next lie was that he brought a rifle across state lines, which would have been a crime. But he did not do so. You see, the rifle itself, it was kept in the state of Wisconsin. It was not brought across state lines. It was just another lie of a liberal bent press. Lie number 3. Lie number 3 was that it was said that it was against the law for a 17-year-old to carry that rifle in the state of Wisconsin. He was even charged with that crime, but that crime was dismissed. It was dismissed because the length of the barrel that Kyle carried, well, it was not against the law for Kyle to carry the very rifle that he carried. Now, closely related to that lie was that people were saying that he was carrying an assault rifle. My friend, an AK-15, or AR-15 rather, is not an assault rifle. You see, an assault rifle has a selective fire. That means that the user can toggle between at least 2 settings, that of semi-automatic and that of automatic. The AR-15 is a gas-powered semi-automatic rifle, which literally means that one pull of the trigger, it corresponds to 1 round being fired. That's kind of like the first rifle I ever owned. It was a .22 rifle, and you would pull the trigger to shoot 1 round. I used that in hunting. But the bottom line was that this AR-15 is not an assault rifle like it was portrayed in the media. You see, that was just another lie. And the rifle, it was loaded with a .223 round, and I just recently saw an advertisement about that round. And that advertisement said these words. Now get this about the ammo he used. They said it's not great in stopping power. And secondly, it said, quote, first round penetration usually wounds. Takes 2 to 3 rounds to stop the threat. So, it was not an assault rifle, and he was not some commando loaded for bear that night. He was just a kid with a rifle defending his community. Lie number 4 is this, that he had no right to be there. My friend, he had just as much right to be there as anyone else that was there that night. Somehow, I guess, because he was not rioting and was not looting that night, well, then he had to be the person in the wrong. Well, how sick is that thought, my friend? Lie number 5, that he was there to cause trouble. Not true again. You see, since he had first aid training as a lifeguard and a volunteer firefighter, as well as a police cadet, well, he had a first aid kit with him, and he went throughout the crowd, and he called out, "Anyone need medical help? Anyone need medical help?" And oh yes, he helped people on both sides of that protest that evening. And I guess he's guilty of something else. He also helped put out fires that evening. Literally helped put out fires. You see, this young man, he was doing good. He was protecting his community and others and the others there who were causing trouble. And those that were causing trouble, well, my friend, it's just quite plain. They resented the fact that this young kid, 17 years of age, was there to be the opposite of what they were doing. And they started the attack. They started the attack that led to Kyle having to defend himself with deadly force. Lie number 6 is that this young 17-year-old could not have enough knowledge to carry that rifle. The fact that he could defend himself from people trying to kill him, including one that was armed, and use such trigger discipline in the midst of a mob, well, my friend, that idea that he didn't know what he was doing, well, that's just plain wrong. You see, those of us who've been trained with weapons, well, we know some of the things that were very obvious in observing Kyle and his weapon that night. First of all, he was careful in the way that he carried his weapon. He was not going around pointing it at everybody. Secondly, he used finger discipline. You see, he did not put his finger on the trigger. You can even see pictures of him and see him in the video throughout. He had his finger on the trigger guard, not on the trigger. That is, unless he had to use it. Next, he did not point the rifle at anyone unless he had to. In fact, in one situation, there was one who was charging him, and when he pointed the rifle, he stopped charging him. But then, when Kyle put the weapon back down to the ground, well, this idiot continued to charge him. And it caused him to repoint his weapon. And then he had to use the weapon as the person lunged at him with his hand on the very rifle, trying to take it away from Kyle. And this person, no doubt, would have used that rifle to kill him, and maybe even kill others. My friend number 4, he did not just fire away at the crowd, even though many of those were yelling, "Kill him, get him," and yet he still maintained weapon discipline. Even a Special Forces combat veteran spoke publicly about how Kyle, this young 17-year-old kid with a rifle, this Special Forces combat veteran said that he used more trigger discipline and was more accurate under extreme pressure than many of those who he had fought side by side in combat with. And remember, those soldiers had been trained for weeks and months before being in a shooter situation. So even though he was a young 17-year-old, just like some of the young men and women who have fought wars for us at 17 years of age, this 17-year-old, well, he used his weapon in an incredible way that night to defend himself and possibly defend others on that unforgettable night. It was against those lies that he had to face a prosecutor who was so bent on sending him to jail that it jeopardized the very right that you and I have to defend our own lives and families. Now, there is a couple of things that he did do wrong that night, and I'm going to tell you those in a moment. But now it's time for our Crazy Crook story. And our Crazy Crook story today comes from Stone County. And according to Stone County Sheriff Doug Rader, there was a guy by the name of James Kurtz. He was trying to sell catalytic converters on Facebook Marketplace. However, this crazy crook, Kurtz, he allegedly, he failed. He failed to move a bag of meth and a syringe out of the background in the photo that was advertising the catalytic converter. And so after being alert about the social media posts from a concerned citizen, Stone County Sheriff Doug Rader, he announced that his team obtained a search warrant to investigate Kurtz's home. And when officers arrived, Kurtz reportedly, he still had 48 grams of meth, as well as a pistol that he was forbidden to own. Now, Rader, he told KY3TV, quote, "In the background was a bag containing a white crystal substance and a needle and a spoon laying next to it." Kurtz, well, he reportedly told deputies he did not know the drugs were in the picture in the first place when he was advertising on Facebook. Well, according to KY3, Kurtz, well, he has multiple past convictions on his record. Surprise there, huh? Including resisting arrest, third-degree domestic assault, possession of a controlled substance, and even endangering the welfare of a child. Now, according to Stone County Jail records, well, James Kurtz, he was charged with possession of a controlled substance and a parole violation. He is still being held at Stone County Jail without bond. And that, my friend, is indeed our crazy crook story of the week. Now back to our main focus story. Kyle Rittenhouse, the kid with a rifle. For those of you who still want to paint this kid as a bad guy, I'm going to give you some satisfaction. Well, yes, first he did. He lied, yep. When someone asked him if he was an EMT, he lied and said yes. When actually, even though he had first aid training, he was not an EMT. Now, before you get so high and holy, let me ask you, have you ever told or exaggerated in your own life, even one time? Tell me that you have never lied or misrepresented the truth in your own life? And, well, it already proved to me that you are a liar, because most people have said one lie at one time or the other. Next, he did violate curfew that night. You see, there was a citywide curfew, but hundreds of others did not heed it, and the cops were not enforcing it. In fact, if all had heeded it, well, Kyle would have not been needed to be there that night to help protect businesses. And a post note here, because there were people there to protect businesses, those businesses, now get this, that had people volunteering to protect such businesses, well, those businesses were not damaged at all that night. Even the car dealerships where the night before over 100 cars were set afire, well, the car dealerships were not touched because of volunteers that were there to protect their own business. You see, many of the places were small businesses, and those businesses was the livelihood of that person and others. Let me ask you a question. Do you think we have a right to protect our own property? Well, I do. And the presence of people that night with weapons, it did protect those such places, while there was other property that was not protected that was indeed damaged. You know, it's a real shame that we've gotten to the point in this country that he had to say that if he had to do it over again, well, he said that he would have never gone that night. Yet, my friend, I've got to tell you, this is one of the most clear cases of self-defense I've ever seen. You see, when Kyle was separated from his army buddy that night, well, the one man that had already said if he found him alone, he would kill him, well, that man chased Kyle as he tried to get away from him. Rather than use his rifle that night at the beginning, he tried to run away, but then that man cornered him, charged him, attempted to take his weapon from him, and Kyle shot him. He did use deadly force, as the law allows him to do so, to protect himself from great harm or death. Now others then began to chase him. One tried literally to knock his head off with a skateboard, tried to take that weapon from him as well. Kyle shot him in self-defense. Next one comes at him, charging at him, pointing another weapon at his head, pointing a weapon at Kyle's head. And yes, Kyle shoots and wounds him first in self-defense. Kyle then goes and he tries to turn himself in to the police right there. But in the midst of the night, that one officer described as a war zone, well, the officers demanded him to go away. So he had to go to a police department near his own home and turn himself over to police there. Then immediately, even before that incident was fully investigated, well, he's charged with murder. You see, the press was believed by the prosecution, and they had to do their best attempt to convict him, even though, my friend, it was clearly self-defense. Now, in this situation, Kyle was fortunate that there was video of the shootings that night. As his lawyer said to him, well, at 98% of the times, video can convict you. But there is that 2% of the time, and it was your 2%, my friend, that successfully defended him. The videos was very clear. No one in their right mind looking at those videos could not conclude that he acted in anything but self-defense. Now, regardless of you thinking he should or should not have been there that night, you have to see that it was self-defense. Now, in our Charlie chat, I want to say that those of you who are on the fence about this one, well, you need to get off of it right now, and you need to get on the right side. And at first, I'm going to confess, I was not very impressed that this young kid with a rifle should have been there that night. But the more I learned about this young man, well, he's 18 now, I have, my friend, come to admire him. Now, there are the critics who say you should not make a hero out of this young man. After all, he took other lives. But wait a minute, think before you say that. Because sometimes heroes have to take other lives to save others. That night, he put his own life at great risk. Many of the looters and rioters there that night had their weapons as well. He did not have to be there. He did not have to care. He did not have to help. He did not have to defend his community, their businesses, and the lives of other volunteers that were there that night. Some of those volunteers did not have weapons. For his caring, for him trying to help, well, now his name and family, well, they were dragged through the mud. For this, he and his family have been threatened and are in danger even today. And now, you do not even want him to get the appreciation for his courage and sacrifice? Well, to me, my friend, he is a hero. He's a hero for those who believe in the inherent right to protect property and life. You see, our early settlers, they often put rifles in the hands of even younger men and women than that to protect their lives and their property from the wilderness and the danger thereof. You say, well, Charlie, that was because there were no police present, or very few of them. Maybe there was marshals around there. Well, that night in Knosha, there was not enough police. Even one of the policemen in the trial said they were outnumbered, that it was like a war zone. And most of the police, well, they stayed in armored vehicles that night while the city burned around them. Fire trucks, medical personnel, they would not even respond in those areas unless absolutely necessary, and they did not respond. And yet a kid with a rifle, put himself at risk and had to defend his very own life from people who wanted to kill him and do great bodily harm to him. Think about this. Just what if he was convicted in the court of law that day? Where would that leave you and I, who still believe we have the right to protect our lives, property, and others we love from the danger of others? Now, in concluding our Charlie chat today, let me say a word to those who carry weapons today, those of us who still do. Mostly concealed weapons, I would say. But let me say to you who are carrying weapons today, make sure you use the discipline of this young man to teach you gun safety. Do not ever use your weapon unless you absolutely have to. You see, for hours that night he carried that weapon. He even ran from danger. He avoided confrontation. He walked away from it, even though he was armed. He tried his best to avoid using that weapon. So do not ever use your weapon unless you absolutely have to. Next, never point your weapon at anyone unless you think you absolutely have to use it. May I say, unlike the prosecutor who believed the lies of the press, the prosecutor who overreached in his prosecution of a clear self-defense situation, this very prosecutor in open court took the very rifle that Kyle had and pointed it directly at the jury to get his point across. Well, the only point he used was that he was a fool to try such a stunt. Never point your weapon unless you absolutely have to. And keep your finger off the trigger guard unless you have to use it. And above all, practice situational awareness. Kyle did not have to be there that night, and now he says he would not if he had it to do over. So if at all possible, avoid dangerous situations before they arise. That's unless you have to face them. In other words, my friend, be alert, be safe. For the life you save, it may be your very own.